In the Michael Douglas, Catherine Zeta-Jones stalking case, these two celebrities were being pursued by a woman they'd never met before.
She talks about cutting up Catherine Zeta-Jones and feeding her parts to her dog.
In one letter, it was an invitation to Miss Jones' own funeral. The over-the-top threats about having your head blown off, as well as the allegations that you're an unfaithful wife and you're a bad person, from someone that you have no idea exists.
We were trying to gather any type of fingerprint evidence, DNA evidence, anything that we could that would lead us to who was sending these letters.
Catherine freaked out. She was Glenn Close incarnate.
June 3rd, 2004. Michael Douglas and wife Catherine Zeta-Jones are Hollywood A-list. They have a seemingly idyllic life with fame, fortune, and success. But the pair are being tracked by a terrifying stalker named Dawnette Knight, who just 8 months earlier began sending violent, threatening letters.
Dawnette Knight described various things like the apartment building which Miss Jones and Mr. Douglas lived, described a housekeeper, described various locations that would indicate that there was some surveillance activity.
Dawnette reportedly wrote several very offensive and demeaning letters, and violent, to friends of Michael Douglas, as well as his father, to Michael Douglas himself. In some of these letters, she talks about cutting up Catherine Zeta-Jones and feeding her parts to her dog.
Cut her up in a million pieces, blow her brains out. And it was at that point that Michael realized that this was pretty serious.
It was a very challenging case. The letters came in, and we would gather each of the letters, analyze them, and send them off to our crime lab and the FBI's crime lab. We were trying to gather any type of fingerprint evidence, DNA evidence, anything that we could that would lead us to who was sending these letters.
Clearly, Miss Knight saw Catherine Zeta-Jones as an impediment to a perceived relationship that she had with Michael Douglas. And if she could just get her out of the picture, obviously she and Michael Douglas would live happily ever after.
It was frustrating on our part because all we had were letters. There was nothing else to go off of until the phone calls came into the Amsterdam hotel. We set up surveillances on that apartment, and we saw Dawnette come and go. We walked up and knocked on Dawnette's apartment door. She answered. She didn't immediately say anything. She was just, I believe, in shock.
Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones are being terrorized, threatened with being maimed and murdered by an unknown anonymous letter writer. More than 30 years earlier, the woman who will go to any means to insert herself in their relationship is born.
I don't know a lot about Dawnette's childhood on her upbringing. I believe she was raised by her grandmother, and she was raised in the Florida area.
She's a mystery.
Little is known about Dawnette Knight's childhood.
She came out to Los Angeles in 2003. Other than that, Dawnette wasn't sharing her childhood, didn't share her years growing up, so we don't know a whole lot about her.
While details of Knight's early days are scarce, we do know that she graduated from Lake Mary High just outside Orlando in 1991. Faculty characterized Knight as a friendly and effusive student.
I know Dawnette was going to school at some point, and I believe it was for child psychology, which is interesting that she's getting into the psychology field and she's stalking a celebrity.
Along with studying psychology, in court documents, Dawnette states that at some point her grandmother sent her to nursing school. A person's formative years can offer key clues to the reasons for their behavior in life. There is limited insight available for Dawnette.
Children need a few things. One of the things that they need is structure and predictability. We call it discipline, but it's what gives us as adults the ability to structure our adult lives. The ability to get up in the morning and go to work, to be able to relate to people and maintain long-term relationships. Those are the things that ground us. And when the child doesn't have that, when they have chaos, then you have chaos as an adult.
Despite assertions about her good behavior, Knight has a checkered past. In her 20s, she accumulates at least 10 charges on her police record. In an ironic bit of foreshadowing, the most serious charge against Dawnette is aggravated battery with a motor vehicle after a jealous dispute involving her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend.
Certainly, past violence is a great indicator of future risk, but at some point, there's a first time for everybody. I think it was a matter of time before she would have escalated to hurt somebody.
Even with a wealth of knowledge about a criminal's childhood, getting to the bottom of what makes them tick is very difficult. Eventually, laying charges can be equally challenging.
One thing I found out about stalking cases is that every case is unique. There are no two cases that are the same. There are dynamics that are different from one case to another, whether it be the victim dynamics or the suspect dynamics.
There are about 7.5 million Americans stalked annually in the United States. And out of those 7.5 million that are stalked annually, only 5 to 16% of the cases are actually filed as stalking. Now, there's reasons for that. Law enforcement can oftentimes charge other crimes other than stalking, which are easier to prove and take less time.
While the early days of Dawnette Knight prove elusive, the same can't be said for Michael Douglas and wife Catherine Zeta-Jones. From a legendary Hollywood family, Douglas has been in the public eye his entire life.
Michael Douglas is a fascinating person, more interesting and complex than a lot of people think. He's got a very interesting story. It's a great American pop culture saga.
Douglas may be born into Hollywood royalty with father Kirk Douglas, but success doesn't come easily. At 25, he is floundering and directionless. He decides a move across the country is in order. While a young Michael is struggling to find his way, the woman who will become his wife enters the world. In 1969, Catherine Zeta-Jones is born to a working-class family in Wales. Diagnosed with hyperactivity as a child, Catherine channels her energy towards performing.
Catherine Zeta-Jones, who was born in Wales as a young child, did musical theater in the West End of London, but did this musical theater. She appeared in Annie and Bugsy Malone on the stage, did some work on a soap opera before making the leap into films.
As Catherine begins to find her passion, Douglas is finally breaking into film, but not as an actor.
As Michael's career was going nowhere very fast, he slowly got the idea that the action for him was in producing.
And I think that he wanted to produce films so he could create his own work and, do the projects that he really wanted to do. One of them, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, became a giant hit, won an Academy Award. As a young producer, to win an Academy Award for Best Picture, because it's the producers that take that award, not the director, not the actors. And you could tell from that moment that he knew things were going to change for him.
In 1977, Michael is working to make movies in Hollywood, but romance comes easier to the notorious Lothario. He marries Deandra Luker, a woman nearly 15 years his junior. Michael's love of younger women is a pattern that will repeat throughout his life.
So even though he was married, and even though he had children, wasn't home that much, and he couldn't say no to any good-looking woman who came his way.
As Michael struggles to be a family man, he is hitting his stride in Hollywood. From Wall Street to Fatal Attraction to Romancing the Stone, he makes one hit after another.
Romancing the Stone was a bit of a change of pace for him. He had made some gritty films. This was just a lot of fun on screen, and they became enormous big hits.
Off the heels of a string of hits, Michael Douglas stumbles personally. In 1992, he makes a trip to rehab, but this intervention proves too little too late to help his ailing marriage.
In a last-ditch attempt to save his marriage, Michael checks into a clinic. The official word was for, I think, drugs and alcohol, definitely alcohol. But unofficially, the word was that it was a sex addiction clinic. Whether or not he was addicted to sex, only Michael knows.
While Douglas flounders, Zeta-Jones is about to make it big after years of hard work.
I think she was exciting because she was not only beautiful, but there was a real strength to her characters. Everyone loves a new face that you finally see an actor on screen and they appear to be fully formed. I mean, she had been working for a long time before we saw her in The Mask of Zorro.
Zeta-Jones' new star power immediately catches Douglas's eye. He works to get her attention with the help of his friend and unlikely wingman, Danny DeVito.
He sees this good-looking woman, and he says to Danny, go over to her and bring her over and ask her if she wants to meet Michael Douglas. And it's a little game they played. So Danny brings over Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Michael's opening line to her is, I would like you to be the mother of my children.
Little does the pair know, their budding romance will go on to put them on the radar of a woman who will attempt to destroy them.
And this woman really imposed herself not only on him, but on the Glenn Close character in Fatal Attraction. She became someone who believed that Michael was in love with her, and that the only thing keeping him from marrying her was this little annoyance called Catherine Zeta-Jones. So she schemed up a plot to get rid of Catherine. And that, of course, is a recipe for disaster.
There were several letters that were formed in the way of cutting out letters from magazines and pasting them on the paper. They ranged from an obituary of Catherine Zeta-Jones to other letters said, we are 90% done with our plan to kill Catherine Zeta-Jones. They all formed around that whole theory of Catherine must die.
It's March 1999, and an up-and-coming actress named Catherine Zeta-Jones is being wooed by Hollywood A-lister Michael Douglas.
It was controversial at the time because there was a 25-year age gap, and that's all that got written about them.
Just months after their engagement in December 1999, the couple is expecting their first child.
Given Michael Douglas' past record of infidelity, in the prenup there was a very specific clause that said if he cheated, that he would pay out a huge lump sum. And apparently it seems to have worked because they've been together for years since then.
Their son is 3 months old when they marry at the Plaza Hotel in 2000. But the couple does encounter criticism for their age difference.
I think to get away from the prying eyes of the press who were fixated on their age difference, they went and lived at a hotel that he owns.
Despite living a private life in Bermuda, Michael and Catherine continue to be very visible on the big screen. She appears in Chicago, the film that will cement her reputation as a powerful actress in Hollywood.
Chicago is probably the career-defining moment for Catherine Zeta-Jones on screen. She won a Best Supporting Actress Academy Award for it. She showed up at the Academy Awards pregnant.
And just as they're riding super high, the stalking begins.
As Michael and Catherine continue to gain attention as a couple, Douglas catches the eye of a mentally unstable young woman named Dawnette Knight.
When you factor in the incidence of mental illness in our community, it equally affects both males and females. And certainly with someone that's high profile like Mr. Douglas is going to generate his share of unwanted attention.
From what we were able to find out about Dawnette Knight, she was intelligent, attractive, dressed well, lived in Hollywood, drove a nice car, dated wealthy men, and for some reason, she saw movies that Michael Douglas was in, and she began to fixate on him, thinking that they had a relationship. This is another way that stalkers follow celebrities, by their movies. Anytime they appear any place, they think that the celebrity is actually communicating with them.
In an odd, bizarre, crazy kind of way, Knight's fantasy became true. She became a factor in Michael's life.
In late April 2004, Knight is becoming more and more infatuated with Douglas. But what is the nature of their relationship? Rumors abound.
There was some speculation that she tried to make an approach at a celebrity golf tournament and pass a note on to Mr. Douglas.
The note professes Dawnette's love for Douglas, calling him, quote, the sexiest man alive. It goes on to say, quote, call me. I would love to show you a good time.
And then she was removed from that golf tournament. So we do know that she had the capabilities to follow and to have enough money to get to locations that were high-end locations.
Did she have an affair with him? When you have an actor who had a reputation for having sex with anything that moved, I mean, it had just enough the possibility of maybe that that might have been part of the reason that Michael hesitated to bring the law in.
But one thing which is crystal clear is that my client never stalked Catherine Zeta-Jones and was never a threat to Catherine Zeta-Jones. Clearly, Dawnette Knight and Michael Douglas knew each other.
What we know about Ms. Knight is she was absolutely consumed with how Mr. Douglas, his family, and his wife in particular were living their lives. She was living vicariously in this soap opera and inserting herself into it. That was her life.
So what kicked it off? Who knows? I certainly don't know. And my guess would be that Michael doesn't know. That only this woman knows, and who can believe her?
Dawnette continues to make claims involving Douglas. In 2002, she says she stays at the same hotel as Zeta-Jones in Las Vegas. She also travels for hours and hours just to get the chance to see Douglas.
So Dawnette traveled in her car all the way to Toronto, where Michael Douglas was conducting a book signing for his father. At that book signing, Dawnette Knight went up to have Michael Douglas autograph the book that she purchased there. However, Catherine was with Michael at that book signing, and she actually had both of them sign the book.
Dawnette's life remains a mystery. She's seen around Los Angeles driving expensive cars and tells people Douglas has put her up in a luxury apartment. On the outside, she looks like she is living the high life.
We don't know how she was functioning at that time. We don't know, was she able to hold a job? How did she support herself? Reportedly, she had an apartment in Beverly Hills, had a large sum of cash on her.
We don't know what work Dawnette actually did. However, we do know that she had some male friends that were providing her with money. It truly is a very touchy subject. Dawnette had several male friends that were very wealthy and helped her financially. She claimed that they were just friends and they just wanted to help her out.
Surprisingly, amidst the rumors, Dawnette is actually engaged to be married. But details on this relationship and this woman's personal life continue to be few and far between.
You know, Dawnette Knight strikes me as the classic Hollywood gadfly that wears all the fancy clothes and the nice jewelry and has a rented car that they can barely afford so that they can get their foot in the door and rub elbows with the Hollywood rich and elite. But behind the scenes, there's no real substance there.
Beyond the cash and flash, Dawnette Knight is coming undone, and the true extent of her delusions are about to become frighteningly clear.
When we get through with her, her body will be unrecognizable, or maybe we'll just blow her away so her head and hair look like President Kennedy's.
2004. Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones are the definition of a power couple. Douglas comes from Hollywood royalty and earns multiple Academy Awards through his storied career. Zeta-Jones is making her own name, flying off successful roles in hit films like Traffic and Chicago.
So Catherine's on top of the world. She's got the recognition of the Academy. The public loves her. She's going to be a mother. Michael is there applauding. Right at that moment, right when everything seems to be perfectly in place, Dawnette Knight enters the picture.
In March 2003, the couple stalker Dawnette Knight is no longer satisfied with trailing Douglas all over North America. She begins a campaign of terror. While the object of her misguided affection is Douglas, her threats are squarely aimed at Zeta-Jones.
In her letters, Ms. Knight makes reference to the President Kennedy assassination, to the murder of Sharon Tate, who was one of many victims of the Manson family and one of the most violent crimes we've seen in Los Angeles. She talks about Nicole Brown Simpson. All of these references are extremely terrifying to a victim receiving these things, but more importantly, reflect just how disturbing and violent her underlying thought process is.
Dawnette reportedly wrote several very offensive and demeaning letters and violent to friends of Michael Douglas, as well as his father, as well as other relatives, and at times to Michael Douglas himself. In some of these letters, she talks about cutting up Catherine Zeta-Jones and feeding her parts to her dog. She wants her removed. We refer to this as a triangle type stalking. So you've got the target that the stalker is going after at the top, and you have the individual in the middle who's in the way of that particular stalker. And so that's why we call them triangle stalkings. And this was terrible for Catherine Zeta-Jones. It was also stressful for anybody that knew that a stalking was transpiring. But as I reviewed the case, I found that the stalker had means. And this is another problem. If they have financial means, they can do other things that the average stalker doesn't do. Keep in mind, though, that when a stalker's in full trim, ready to go, firing on all cylinders, what they do is stalk. They don't do anything else. They don't usually work. Dawnette Knight had fun, so she was able to follow where Michael Douglas went and where Catherine Zeta-Jones also went.
The letters and phone calls start coming fast and furious, and one particularly disturbing note, a notice of Catherine's obituary is sent to the extended family. The handwritten pamphlet was threatening in nature and contained personal information on the actress.
You know, Ms. Knight actually creates a false obituary for Catherine Zeta-Jones, is talking about the kids, about slicing up her victim. I mean, this material was over the top, disturbing, and was taken seriously as it should have been.
This case went for several months, just receiving letters, not knowing who wrote these letters. It was frustrating on an investigative standpoint. When I first read the letters, saw the hatred, saw the violence in the letters, it was very concerning.
Letters are arriving from Michael's father, Kirk Douglas, along with Zeta-Jones's agent and a former boyfriend, among others. All these letters go to intimate details about the couple's life. How could a stranger know obscure information about their nannies and the layout of their homes?
The way Dawnette was able to track Catherine and Michael from traveling either to their home in Bermuda or even on set, on location in Amsterdam, Dawnette utilized the internet. It was interesting the way Dawnette sent the letters. The letters were addressed to her intended target. However, she wanted to ensure that if that person did not receive them, another person within Catherine and Michael's circle would receive it. She would put another person's return address on that same envelope.
Along with letters, the phone calls begin. Bermuda turns out to be anything but the sanctuary the family intended.
A phone call came into the Errol Sands Hotel, and it was received by the desk person. The person on the phone threatened Catherine, stating that she was going to kill Catherine.
She may have went out to where the Douglases were staying for a period of time.
No one knows how Dawnette is able to so closely monitor the Douglases and track them to an exact location.
She would have other information about houses that they used to live in or places they were staying.
These are not just pieces of paper. The letters are vicious. Zeta-Jones is the unknowing target of Dawnette Knight's sinister plan.
The letters varied from handwritten to cutting and pasting letters from magazines. The letters were to threaten Catherine, whether she was at home. They would follow her where she was on various filming sets.
So the letters were meant to convince him that she was a better woman for him than Catherine. And the violent nature of the letters were all about all the things she was going to do to Catherine to get rid of her. Cut her up in a million pieces, blow her brains out. And I think she saw herself as a character in a film with Michael that only she knew existed, and that Catherine was the other woman.
Knight is tracking Zeta-Jones's every move. Douglas's half-brother receives a terrifying letter reading, quote, "I guess me and my associates will have to get rid of her before she starts filming in April." Quote, "She'll be dead before she gets ready to blink an eye."
In addition to that, we also see letters to Miss Jones and Mr. Douglas's family members trying to undermine her credibility as a faithful wife, speculating on rumored affairs that she had with other co-stars and actors. So she's taken a shotgun approach, all focused towards getting Miss Zeta-Jones out of the picture that would leave Michael Douglas more accessible to Dawnette Knight.
Tabloid said that Zeta-Jones was having an affair with George Clooney. That upset her, and she sent letters telling her to stop.
After trying to shield him from this harsh reality of life in the spotlight, Douglas's family alert him to the threats. He can now see just how dangerous this situation has become.
Kirk Douglas is hoping that the letters would eventually stop and that they would go away. Oftentimes with celebrities, they would get letters from fans, and some would be more aggressive than others, but oftentimes they would just subside on their own. Kirk Douglas reached out to the Sheriff's Department. We went and interviewed Mr. Douglas. He provided us with 12 letters that he had received. The letters were anonymous, but they all had one tone, that they wanted to kill Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Initially, Catherine Zeta-Jones was kept out of the picture because Michael didn't want to disturb her, didn't want to cause her issues.
There's a lot of thought that went into these letters, not only the making of the letters, what the content that went into them, but she was trying to be careful not to leave any evidence behind, whether it's fingerprint or DNA.
With few leads in sight, the LA County Sheriff's Department turns to the FBI for help. They are determined to put a stop to these vicious threats. Despite his reluctance, investigators tell Michael that he needs to inform Catherine of these frightening promises of her violent demise. They need to speak to her about the letters.
Catherine freaked out.
Those were very emotional, very terrifying for Catherine.
Imagine, if you will, being Catherine Zeta-Jones and being on the receiving end of this type of communications. The over-the-top threats about being cut up into pieces and having your head blown off, as well as the allegations that you're an unfaithful wife and you're a bad person, you're a terrible mother, from someone that you have no idea exists.
The police are now working feverishly to figure out who is threatening to kill Catherine in a sick and twisted effort to get closer to Michael. But with no leads in sight, Catherine is incredibly vulnerable. This deranged person could show up anytime, anywhere. The actress takes the warnings to heart and increases her security detail. Lurking in the shadows, Dawnette knows exactly how this story will play out.
She went from an anonymous figure to someone who had an identity. And in her movie, the movie in her mind, she's the heroine. And Catherine is the bad woman, and Michael is the knight in shining armor, who is going to rescue her and realize that he's in love with her and live happily ever after.
May 2004, Catherine Zeta-Jones is in Amsterdam filming the upcoming movie Ocean's 12. She and her husband Michael Douglas have success, wealth, and a beautiful family. But the pair is living in fear of an unknown stalker who is trying to rip their lives to shreds.
It's very unusual for a 32-year-old female to become delusional, to become fascinated by a celebrity or obsessed about a celebrity to the point of sending threats. Dawnette Knight is very different from your typical celebrity stalker that has erotomanic delusions where they believe the celebrity is in love with them. Although Dawnette did appear to have an erotomanic delusion, it lasted for such a short period of time. We also don't know how she was functioning in other areas of her life, which is a big deal when we're trying to figure out what is her diagnosis.
The situation is quickly becoming dire. With her encyclopedic knowledge of the entire Douglas family, Dawnette has already proven she can strike at any moment. While Zeta-Jones is in Amsterdam filming Ocean's 12, the stalker somehow manages to track her down at her hotel. The front desk receives several terrifying calls saying, quote, "We know she's in the hotel, and we are going to kill her." Zeta-Jones takes swift action. She quickly increases her number of security from 1 to 4. The team takes these threats very seriously. Jones is protected by a bulletproof shield wherever she goes.
She didn't know who was there, if this person was on the streets watching her film, When she was filming, they tried to keep the crowds back further. However, at the same time, she has to allow a certain amount of access to the public, to her fans.
With Zeta-Jones and Douglas living in constant fear for their safety, the LA County Sheriff's Department is determined to track down the unhinged, dangerous person responsible for these threats.
Catherine was in fear for her life. She truly was terrorized by these letters. She changed her way of life. During the investigation, she was terrified of these letters coming in. Someone wanted to kill her. Yet, because she had to continue to do her job, and her job is being a celebrity, she's an actress, she had to go out into the public, which is terrifying.
Dawnette has been meticulous in her efforts to elude police, but she has finally slipped up. Now investigators have a solid lead to run down.
The first 2 phone calls that came into the Amsterdam hotel were made from one calling card. That calling card was only used to call the Amsterdam hotel, and it called from 2 separate payphones in the Beverly Hills area. The third phone call that came in 2 days later to the Amsterdam hotel was made from a different calling card.
After months of violent, threatening correspondence and psychological torture, investigators are hot on Dawnette's heels.
Dawnette made a mistake with that calling card, however. She used that same calling card to call from her apartment to family living in Florida. So we wrote search warrants, obtained the information from the calling card from the phone number of her apartment, which then gave us the address of her apartment. We set up surveillances on that apartment, and we saw Dawnette come and go at that time. However, it wasn't a clear cut of, yes, this is the person that sent the letters, this is the person that made the phone calls.
Police observed Dawnette's tactics, depositing the letters at various street mailboxes.
I believe that Dawnette did this attempting to conceal her identity. She didn't want to go into a post office where she knew that there would be cameras.
Detective Wagner and his colleagues are putting the pieces together and working furiously to ensure Dawnette doesn't slip through their fingers and follow through on her terrifying threats.
The more he rejected her, the more desperate she became in her letters, in her fury toward Catherine, in her insistence that he was going to be hers. So if you don't stop that, it could lead to some dangerous and dark circumstances.
You don't have to actually kill someone for criminal threats to be valid, but you have to have the capability of being able to carry out the threat.
Luckily, investigators catch a break.
Several days into the surveillance, I received information from the FBI's crime lab that they were able to identify 10 fingerprints on 2 of the letters that were sent to Kirk Douglas. The FBI was able to identify the fingerprints as the fingerprints of Dawnette Knight. Once we made confirmation that that was Dawnette's fingerprints on the letters, we had confirmation that a calling card was used by Dawnette, the same calling card that was used to make the threat in Amsterdam. We knew we had enough to place Dawnette under arrest.
After months of terrorizing Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas, Dawnette's letter-writing campaign looks like it is finally over.
June 3rd, at approximately 8 o'clock, we went and knocked on Dawnette's apartment door. We were able to make contact with Dawnette and advise her that we were conducting the investigation and that we needed to talk with her back at the station. Dawnette knew exactly what we were talking about. At that time, she didn't want to talk about the case. She acknowledged who we were. She knew what we were there for. We were able to take her back to the West Hollywood Sheriff's Station and conduct an interview. Dawnette did make one statement when she exited our car. She was emphatic that this was just a prank. She was scared, she was apologetic for it, but she referred to this whole situation as just a prank. I don't think she really thought she was going to be caught.
A search of Dawnette's apartment reveals a massive stash of research, binders full of materials containing every shred of information on the couple. Now, Dawnette Knight is finally in police custody and being held on $1 million bail. But this case is far from over. In July of 2004, court proceedings begin. With her violent past, Dawnette is seen as a serious threat. She is handcuffed to a chair while the targets of her blind rage testify at the preliminary hearing. Douglas tells the court that his wife, quote, felt like a marked person because of the threats.
Even though we're at the court, the person that wrote these letters was arrested. They still terrified her. The decision to have Catherine testify in this case wasn't an easy decision. In a preliminary hearing, oftentimes the investigating officer will testify for the victim. In this case, the district attorney wanted to put Catherine on. I don't like to have the victim go in front of the defendant. In a way, you're victimizing your victim again.
Courtroom illustrator Mona Schaefer-Edwards has the front row seat.
I was struck by how Dawnette looked when they took her out into the courtroom, and she was handcuffed. Her hair was very unkempt, and she was already crying. I think that she realized the severity of it as coming into the courtroom, and it was a full courtroom, and everybody was staring at her. So, it started off with a bang, actually. Pretty interesting.
As in most celebrity stalking trials, the pinnacle comes with the victim's testimony.
When Catherine Zeta-Jones took the stand, she just took over the trial. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. She just reigned. She was very angry. She was looking at the defendant. She wasn't afraid. Her words were very measured. And she was very mad, like cold, icy cold. Same thing with her husband. He glared at Dawnette Knight. Very clipped answers, very curt. Didn't give her the benefit of seeing how upset he was. He put on a very good face of anger rather than being afraid.
In a subsequent statement, Zeta-Jones will address Knight directly, stating, quote, "You will never be famous. You will never be infamous. You were just a criminal."
There was a total intrusion into their lives, and they were not going to put up with it.
The hearing showcases the prosecution's strong case, but before things can proceed, there is a delay after Knight reportedly overdoses on barbiturates. Dawnette's fiancé addresses reporters outside the courthouse.
It's been hell. I cannot lie. I was totally shocked.
The details are a little unclear about Dawnette Knight's supposed suicide attempt. She was in custody, she was in jail. It doesn't seem likely that she would have access to too many pills. Reportedly in court, I believe it was her attorney that said she took 2 pills. She could have quite easily gotten 2 pills, either not taken 1 dose and saved it for the next one.
Knight tells the court she suffers from depression. She is evaluated, and it's ruled she suffers from a delusional disorder. Despite the diagnosis, experts rule that Knight is fit to continue the proceedings. But will the powerful testimony of both Zeta-Jones and Douglas be enough to secure a guilty verdict?
Having handled a number of investigations involving obsessive individuals, with this type of aberrant, over-the-top behavior, it's hard for me to imagine that Miss Knight is just going to stop doing what she does and go away forever.
In February 2005, after months of a vicious, cruel campaign designed to terrorize Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, Dawnette Knight is about to learn her fate.
Well, with the Michael Douglas-Dawnette Knight case, we know that Dawnette Knight was obsessed and focused on Michael Douglas. A lot of the attention was directed towards Catherine Zeta-Jones in efforts to dissuade her from continuing her relationship with Michael Douglas, making Michael Douglas more accessible to Miss Knight and Miss Knight's overtures.
There is little explanation for Knight's extremely violent, extremely threatening behavior, countless horrifying letters and phone calls. A doctor tells the court Knight possesses a high degree of criminal sophistication when attempting to cover her tracks, and a high potential for dangerousness.
We do have something called brief psychotic disorder. Brief psychotic disorder is typically brought on by a very stressful event. People can be acting in a very bizarre or disorganized manner, which fits with Dawnette's case. These delusions in brief psychotic disorder only last for 4 weeks. Can it last for 8 months? Possibly. We don't have good research in this area.
Knight's stalking runs from January 2003 to May 2004. She is facing charges of 1 count of felony stalking and 24 charges of making criminal threats. These are serious offenses, And with letters and phone call records, the prosecution seems to have a strong case.
Even though this stalking occurred in a short duration of time, there was volumes of very vile, very threatening communication from Miss Knight. And that in and of itself is a crime.
She became increasingly violent in the letters, threatening to cut him in a million pieces, to do what had been done to John Lennon.
It seems that Knight is realizing her case may be unwinnable. She agrees to a deal, pleading guilty to the stalking and threat charges. In exchange, the prosecution drops 21 charges against her.
By putting on a strong preliminary hearing, Dawnette and her attorney knew that we had a strong case against her. It was in Dawnette's best interest to go ahead and take a plea deal to where she would plead guilty to the stalking and a single count of criminal threats.
With Knight deciding to plead guilty, the question now becomes, what will her sentence be?
Her fate is at stake today.
Ultimately, Dawnette pled out to 1 count of stalking and 1 count of criminal threats, which had a sentence of 3 years probation.
When you look at the totality of the sentence that she was given, she was in custody for over 1.5 years on the initial arrest, and then was given credit for time served, and then did an additional few months after that. I think that's fitting for this type of charge, given the fact that many of the criminal threat charges were dismissed, and she was convicted on the 1 count of stalking.
I think the important thing that we wanted was the court to mandate that Dawnette seek psychological help. She received the counseling that she would need. In addition to the 3-year probation sentence, Catherine Zeta-Jones as well as Michael Douglas were able to get a 10-year restraining order against Dawnette.
The restraining order includes 18 other family and friends of the couple. At her sentencing, Knight addresses the court, apologizing for working to terrify and psychologically torture the couple.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, hey, you're in jail. You did something stupid. If you do this again, you're going to throw your life away.
She was crying. She was embarrassed, deeply, deeply touched by the things she had done, almost like that she was a different person before. A lot of the stalkers that I have covered are totally without any kind of guilt or knowledge of why they're even there.
She can say anything she wants in court or any place else, but the fact remains, let's see what time tells us. Stalkers are notoriously manipulative. They often tell people what they want to hear, or what they think other people want to hear, and they will often try different ways of reaching their victims.
There's no word for where Knight is today, or any updates on the expired restraining order. While there is no clear-cut psychological explanation for Knight's behavior, this case offers several important takeaways for investigators, along with some harsh truths for Zeta-Jones and Douglas.
We learned 2 things. We learned about triangle stalking, and we also learned that just because you're a celebrity and you seem to have the world by the tail, you can be victims of a crime and be extremely traumatized. You need to understand that just because they're celebs, they're still people and they have feelings.
Knight's fantasy left real scars that both of them had to deal with. Only in Hollywood do you have happy endings. In real life, those happy endings don't happen at the end of 2 hours and everybody lives happily ever after.
During the preliminary hearing in this case where Catherine testified, she was still very terrified of what was going on. She told me it took a long time for those fears to subside.
And this is an instance that had no real ending. These things never really end.